Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, today's episode is about the collective consciousness, particularly as it pertains to Jung, and then also as it pertains to spirituality and different archetypes. And if that sounds a little bit dry, it is actually what is part of a karmic cycle that repeats. And so it is important information for us to kind of ingest at this particular time as we approach as a society what appears to be a cyclical repetition in history. So, yay, isn't this all fun? But it's important to understand that there is some scientific and psychological theory and fact behind this as to why we suffer from sometimes groupthink, but what the collective consciousness is in a spiritual capacity outside of that. And joining me for this is my friend Jacob Fluharty. It's been a minute, Jacob. How you been?
Been doing well, thanks. It's good to be back. I'm finally getting a little bit of winter around here, which is lovely. It's been so hot lately.
It's been wintry in California, and yes, we do actually get cold temperatures here in California. I had to wear gloves on my morning walk, but of course, it's nothing compared to places that get, driven snow and ice and all of that.
Right.
That's like one of my exercises in gratitude, being like, "Oh my God, I'm cold, but at least I'm not in North Dakota."
Oh
So
yeah.
let's cover the housekeeping really quickly before we get into this because it pertains to tarot card readers as well, anyone who has intuition, anyone who's trying to reach into their psychic gifts, and anyone who's trying to manifest. Because our basically our collective energy, which is the collective consciousness, and what's also called the energetic realm, does have an influence on what we can perceive. And it can actually cause false returns in tarot when too many people believe the same thing that is perhaps not based in fact. So let's housekeeping. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. I have a Patreon. It's linked in the description box or the episode notes below, where I do weekly and monthly spirit guide messages. You can always find the video versions of this on Chromecast at the Rising Moon on YouTube. Most people seem to listen to the audio, but some people like the videos, so we always put it up there as well. You can find Jacob at, I think you've changed your tags, dude, so I'm going to throw it over to you. Where can we find you for
Yeah,
your work?
I have. Yeah. So everything's gotten rebranded. So now you can find it at the reflectivepathtarot.com is the new website. And that tag is the same on Facebook. You can find me there as well. And everything should be set up and good to go as of now.
That's the reflectivepathtarot.com.
Mhm.
Reflective like a mirrored surface. So
Yeah.
awesome. It's good to know. And Jacob's a very good and intuitive reader, and I recommend him as well. And he does a form of coaching as well through his own work. So we're talking about the collective consciousness. Now, let's approach it first from what the heck is it? The collective consciousness is the idea that we have a united mind in an energetic state. Now, does that mean that like you can tap into it and perceive what other people are thinking? Potentially, yes, through cards. It is something, the easiest way to illustrate it is through the idea of crowd mentality. If you look at something like a crowd after a football game and it's everyone's jubilant, they're having this energetic shared experience. Everyone's like, yay. And then it turns on a dime and people are flipping over cars because it gets out of control, the energy builds and it gains momentum. And so that's one of the ways you can approach it. The other idea is something, having to do with anything in the political sphere is that we become entrenched in our views. And the more people who believe something, the more likely we are to accept it as fact without questioning it. And that has some unfortunately dangerous implications for the idea of cyclical history. And is history really cyclical? Yes, it is. Is karma cyclical? Yes, it is. If we choose to break a pattern, then we can break that karmic cycle. And of course, karma really does have to do more with lessons than it has to do with rewards or punishments. As we try to evolve towards our higher self, we are given the opportunity to learn the lessons that will carry our soul forward into a state of higher consciousness where we have more ready access to the idea of collective consciousness. But for right now, I'm turning over to Jacob to talk to him about what his findings were on the collective consciousness from the standpoint of scientific theory, because I love science. I'm a science girl. If you want to find me in my off hours, I'm watching some form of science fiction half the time. I've always been a science person. Um, but I do something that is very esoteric. And does it cause a little bit of conflict within? Sometimes it does, but what I really believe is that most of what I can do really does have a basis in energetic theory that we do not fully understand yet. But that I
Mhm.
also believe there's a spiritual component and that there are energetic forms of life in that energetic realm that I referred to, which is the state that we are in between 3D lives. Is the other thing that we can access. That is where potentially our guides exist, where people who are no longer in an incarnate state or disincarnates who are not bound to the earthly realm can also be reached. So, what have you found, Jacob? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, so I kind of come at this from the this like analytical psychology kind of viewpoint, which was, popularized by Carl Jung, after he split with, Freud's ideas at the time. And so what he kind of delved into was more of like this idea of like a collective unconsciousness and how we are all influenced by it. And it's we we kind of get into uh, talks about like ancestral DNA and all that stuff, and that's a little not scientifically backed. But then again, so are a lot of the ideas that I'm going to talk about today anyway. But they tie in together with the collective consciousness as well as this idea that there is, this, grand. It ties into pantheism a lot, which is kind of what brought me to the topic was, exploring that idea of like the great consciousness that exists and how we are all connected to it and we all kind of derive from it. So the scientific research on it is kind of like varied. It depends on which sources you're going to as far as like if you're going to take the validity too far. There's been quote unquote studies done by the CIA and other government entities into the topic. They were doing things like, can humans do things like remote viewing and astral projection and things like that? And um, basically, it's just saying that we're all tied together, right? And this energetic field that exists all around us. And Jung kind of took it a step further and saying that, this unconsciousness also exists, where we as a species are connected through shared experiences that have manifested themselves over time in cycles, as you said, like it's a very cyclical idea as well, where think about if we want to talk about like creation myths through the different religions, different archetypes and stories that exist with these archetypes, and how culturally, I mean, like allowing for variance, due to, specific culture variance. Ultimately, we can kind of boil everything down to these shared archetypical experiences that connect us all together, right? And so it's an understanding of how these archetypes are manifested and how we can connect and relate to each other through them. And then using them, we can kind of like do different things like psychologically, understand things, sociologically a lot better. But yeah, just kind of like the interconnectedness of it all, really. And, the scientific research is kind of like mixed, unfortunately, because it does at uh, on a level brings in an air of mysticism, right? Just by definition. And so, the scientific community is always going to give you a little bit of pushback anytime you want to introduce that element to it. But luckily, Jung didn't really care about that, and he delved into it anyway. And so it's a very interesting amalgamation of like science and mysticism that I personally find very intriguing. And I've based kind of like my practice around it. So
What's kind of interesting to me is that in the whole chicken and the egg, which came first theory, we in tarot there are archetypes represented, particularly in the major arcana, and they do deal with our subconscious influences and the patterns that we repeat when we're aware of them. Awareness is one of the things that helps us break cycles. So you can use tarot, and I have used tarot, and you have used tarot, to take a look at the subconscious influences from a collective standpoint to see what things we are carrying forward. You referred very briefly to the idea of generational history carrying forward, which
Mhm.
the easiest way to understand that is through get outside of the bipedal examples and look towards dogs, because this is the easiest way to understand how something is carried forward. Different dogs are bred for different traits. What explains a dog that has never been a hunting breed knowing how to point other than it is instinctual and that they have bred for that particular trait so that DNA carries forward certain information so that we
Mhm.
repeat certain patterns. So it is literally part of our own physical bodies that we are carrying forward cycles. It is why there's something called generational trauma, which is also generational curses, basically, is carrying forward an energy over and over again. A cycle will repeat until such time as we take the aware steps to break it. But it is so deeply ingrained in us that we have yet to be able to do that as a race, as the human race. One of the easiest ways to understand that as well is you can look back in our recent history, but it goes all the way back through ancient history, which I've spent the last couple of years really acquainting myself with ancient history. There are many civilizations that have come and gone. We have a tendency to think whatever civilization we are involved in is permanent. That is almost not going to be true across the board. We have a tendency to rise to a certain level of functionality and a certain level of advancement in technology, and then we turn against each other as a species. And we do it over and over and over again. So, in these cyclical patterns and this collective unconsciousness, there is actually an energy of self destruction and self sabotage, which is the karmic cycle that we are trying to break through awareness. Spirituality is one of the things that aids awareness and guides us towards better choices with a better understanding of self so that we aren't defensive about the patterns that we are repeating, but rather we are informed about them and thereby freed from them through our awareness. Now, can you talk to me a little bit about Carl Jung, who is a behaviorist? That's correct, right? He's a behavior because Jacob's the person with the more academic background in psychology. I just do a bunch of research. It is not something that I do not have a degree in psychology. But Jacob has more formal training in psychology than I do. I simply do, I have a question, and I go out and I do a ton of research on it. And I do use peer-reviewed research. Like I said, I'm a science girl. I really do enjoy it. It's not that I don't believe that there is an application of esoteric and spiritual theory or the narratives that are formed around spirituality. I just like to be able to compare and contrast, believing that the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, that most spiritual experiences have a basis in our own ability to carry electrical current through our thought patterns and through our brains. Jacob, talk to me a little bit about Carl Jung.
Yeah, so he was a behaviorist, yeah, and he after he got his education and all that, he studied with Freud, and did based a lot of his like early like research and like foundational material on that, but they split because, well, mostly because Freud was sex obsessed more than anything, and Jung was like, I'm not about that life. Doesn't make sense. You can't base everything on this like sex drive. Like, it's come on, that's ridiculous. So he was like, I'm gonna go do my own thing, and he focused more on our unconscious mind. Like, he was really into, like he was on board with the whole ego, id scenario, and he took it a step further. And he was basically saying, like, sex is a driving force of our life, but it is not the driving force of our life, the way that Freud would say. And so he started what we now refer to as the branch of psychology, as analytical psychology, which, is still practiced. You can find analytical practitioners in your neighborhood if you would like. And it just focuses on the unconscious mind and how the unconscious mind experiences the world, and how it, influences not just you as an individual, but humanity as a collective, right? And so he was really into things like dream interpretations, assigning the symbolism, like we talked about with the different archetypes, and how we can use the archetypes and the way that they influence us individually and societally to like affect change, not just on ourselves, but on society as a whole. If you want to take it that far, most people are going to use it. Like, there are a lot of people listening probably are familiar with it, with working in this manner. Shadow work is a big word that is thrown around a lot, right? And that's just analytical psychology. I mean, that's basically that is what Jung was talking about on the individual level. That's one of his archetypes. The shadow, it represents, weaknesses, impulses, base desires of human nature. Your devil card, if you want to. Most of the archetypes have a tarot like
Yeah, can you
counterpart.
give us a couple of
Um,
examples of what the archetypes are in tarot?
Yeah, yeah. So the big ones would be like you have the self, which represents, obviously yourself, your consciousness, individualization. That's oftentimes represented with the world card, which some of these you have to kind of like stretch for, but
Mhm.
we got the self, we have the shadow, which we just talked about, which is represented with the devil most of the time. We have the anima and the animus, and those are it depends on whether you're male or female, but the anima would be inner feminine traits and qualities in males, with the animus being the masculine inner qualities in females. Those are represented by the high priestess and the magician, respectively. The persona, which would be like the mask that you wear whenever you present yourself to the world, that's oftentimes is analogated with the Hierophant. We have the hero, which is courage, self-sacrifice for greater causes. Is with the Chariot. The wise old man would be with the Hermit, which would be what wisdom and guidance through life. And then like the rest of these are kind of like the Great Mother, representing fertility, creation, nurturing energy, would be with the Empress. It's like another good one. I mean, obviously the child and the sun match together perfectly. Innocence, new beginnings. Just see one that's like really off the wall that maybe people wouldn't think about. The Destroyer, I like him a lot too. Represented with the Tower, which that brings about abrupt change and great transformation. So like the timelines, I don't, you could say that he was influenced, one was influenced by the other, but they match
I'm
fairly
going to
well, right?
interrupt for
Yeah.
just because I don't think that Jung's work was based on the tarot. I don't,
No,
but I
no, 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 no.
already
But
explored,
it's interesting,
meaning that
right?
this information has been carried forward. We've had an awareness of it before we had terminology for it. Back to you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's just like I think that that exemplifies kind of like what we're talking about as a whole is like, these ideas and these archetypes are so universal and they're so universally understood that like, the two originated and developed separate of one another, but are basically carrying the same ideas forward. And so we can utilize this, unconscious nature um, in a physical 3D way to enact change. Usually it's on ourselves, but I mean, there is a greater, conversation to be had for like societal change. And you brought up like the cyclical nature of things. That's one of the things that Jung talks about a lot is like the cyclical nature of the consciousness or the unconsciousness rather manifesting itself over time. Like that's why our stories are told at the same way across generations. Why we have the same heroes and villains and all these different elements that make them up. All of our parables, they all match up in similar ways, across cultures. That's because we're all tapping into this unconscious thought that exists that, you know, leads us into, wherever we're going next.
And that's the concept of spirituality outside of the basic science of it, is that if you look at the creation stories or narratives from most religions, you will find many uniting elements, including that there was a great flood, which is present in Norse mythology. It is also present in Egyptology. It is also present in Christianity. It is also present in Judaism, obviously, as we know, Judaism fed into Christianity. And so we have these connective narratives that try and help us understand. And that, of course, is representing the Great Destruction, which is rebirth. We think of change as being a foe, and in spirituality, change is our only path towards advancement and enlightenment. And so somebody like Jung, and really quickly, I'm going to address Freud's issues because like I can't help but laugh a little bit because there were issues. Listen,
Oh
he
yeah.
substance abuse. He had physical relationships with his female patients. He really was like the sexual repression of the times was manifested through Freud in assigning absolutely everything to what we were, you know, wanted to screw your parents and all kinds. Like it was really very overt, and it was the basis of a lot of our analytical theory when it comes to psychology to this particular day. But that we need to remember it was the seed of something. It was not the fruit bearing tree that would eventually grow through more greater understanding of the nature versus nurture and what truly forms us. And the impulses, which is our shadow side, or the part of our personality that is formed through trauma in spirituality. We're trying to resolve our trauma to find out who we authentically are. One of the podcasts I did on emotional orphaning, that research was very interesting for me, and I actually had to take like a break the next day after doing a deep dive into it, because it was like reading a list of me, and it was like, great, so I'm basically a trauma response. My entire personality, all the things I've struggled with in my life, are actually symptoms of trauma versus an authentic part of me. Now, I'm
Hmm.
using myself as an example, but that's true for everybody. And
Hmm.
so Freud had an element of it, Jung had an element from it. We are always trying to advance in any form of spiritual or scientific theory, and advancement is one of the things that will break the cycle. But the narratives that we are told over and over through our religions and through our spiritual teachings does not mean that they are fictitious. What it means that it is a collective message from a collective unconsciousness and the collective consciousness to try and lead us from a path of self-destruction. And so, the concept in spirituality is that this information comes through to us in 3D narratives that are broken down into bite sized pieces that we can all understand, ingest, and hopefully enact. But our base natures, or our shadow side, has a tendency to rule in our personal universe unless we choose to have it not. And so
Hmm.
that is the point of understanding this, is that all of the things that we hide from in ourselves, all the things that we might not like, if you're prone towards jealousy, if you're prone towards greed, these are not character assessments. It is basically a accounting of the shadow side developments within you. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's completely simply part of human nature. And what spirituality and psychology, because they are trying to do the same thing, is to help us find a way out of our darkness into our lighted path. And a lighted path leads us towards advancement, enlightenment, and the ability to connect not simply to the subconscious, but to the collective consciousness. And what would be the information in the collective consciousness that we're trying to glean? We're trying to find a way to evolve as people so that we can achieve the best that we can be, instead of being broken down by our lesser impulses, or the things that Freud tried to explore but put it all down to bonking. He was like, it's all
Right.
about our private parts, and it's kind of not.
Huh.
It's all
Right.
about the desires that we are trying to assuage within, that usually have to do with unmet needs, that through knowledge, connection, and advancement, we can learn how to meet them ourselves rather than seeking an external remedy to an internal problem. So,
Right. Yeah. Mm.
Jacob, how have you found shadow side work with, you're pretty schooled in Jung. How have you found it to apply to your own life and to your own journey?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough is that, the shadow side is not inherently negative.
No.
It also contains like untapped potentials. So whenever you're like doing your shadow work, it's not so it means definitely well, for me personally, I can't speak for everybody, but it definitely is about, facing these more quote unquote, I feel about, putting morality on things, but quote unquote negative, parts of yourself or thoughts or, emotions or what have you. But it's also about, looking into the untapped potentials that you have, the things that are being kind of like repressed
Mm.
for whatever reason, there's whole reasons why they could be happening, but it it is to lead you into this path of personal growth, that just brings you to your most authentic self. And that is accepting the quote unquote negative and positives of your personality, or what makes you up. And but also like not being afraid to achieve things. I think for a lot of people, my I can speak for myself as the example. There are so many things that like can hold you back that are like negatives, like fear, jealousy, all these whatever. But you know, if, I guess based on like different little t traumas that you may have had growing up, fear of success or fear of achievement, or like feeling like you're unworthy of achievement is like something that is very big for a lot of people. And sorry, my emotions have been crazy this week. You have to excuse me. I'm like triggered by everything. But like you walk so long feeling like you don't deserve to be happy, or you don't deserve to like achieve X, Y, or Z. And so you internalize it, and then that becomes your thought process, which is why I'm become very big on, uh, self-talk and being positive with your self-talk. And because the way that you talk to yourself is the way that you see yourself. Doing silly little things like, giving yourself pep talks in the mirror, like
Mhm.
it's silly and you feel stupid when you do it, but I mean, overall, it does affect positive change. And so when you're doing your shadow work, yes, you need to be looking at, those more negative aspects of yourself, like your fears and your jealousies and all of those things, but also give yourself time to look at the positive traits that maybe are suppressed as well. And expand on those a little bit, and explore those aspects of your nature as well. Because you don't want to just focus on the things that are limiting. You want to focus on the things that can expand you as well, because it just goes back to that self-talk thing, right? Like if you just focus on the negative parts of yourself, that's all you're going to see of yourself. So think about the things that make you really awesome as well, that you maybe are suppressing in that shadow side.
So on the concept of, by the way, do never apologize for having your emotions come to the fore. It's healthy. We have, as a society, normalized the idea of emotional repression as being a good thing, and in fact, it is the thing that compounds our shadow work and makes it more difficult. I'm actually gonna put down a couple of examples of how the shadow side is actually contains elements that drive us towards greater enlightenment, success, and happiness. And you want to refer again to the chakras, which is CHAKRA, which are the energy wheels, the meridians along our spine. We're going to talk about the sacral chakra. Now, the sacral chakra dictates things like our sexual impulses, like addiction, like frustration, like anger. Anger can be a very destructive force, or it can be a protective force. Impulsivity is also the same thing, which can be very destructive. It causes you to act before you think, but it is also the basis of our creativity. That spark can go in one direction or another. All things contain its opposite. And so even in our darker impulses, because judging something as negative or positive in the shadow realm doesn't really do anything, but understanding whether or not it has a positive or a negative impact on the quality of your life and your self-acceptance. When we talk about needing to have very positive self-talk, we want to figure out how to break our cycles. If the greater world will not break its cycle, guess how you contribute to the greater world breaking its cycle? You break yours. Remove
Mm.
yourself from that collective by being conscious, by being individual, by being wholly integrated within, by being in alignment with your highest self. And so then, because like energy attracts like energy, the experiences that come towards you, this is what the law of attraction and manifestation is based on, is that we create the energy that then is attracted towards us. And so, no matter what the greater world is doing, you can still break your cycles and be freed from them, regardless of, you don't need to be a joiner. You need to be an individual. You need to understand yourself. And positive self talk is one of the most important things in healing our shadow realm, because it removes guilt and shame. Because so many of the things that we struggle with, we try to hide from, because society tells us that bad, that's wrong. If it's, whether it's sexual hyperactivity, a couple of other things, it's actually one of the things that ADHD can result in hypersexuality.
Mhm.
Understanding that is one of the things that can free people from the shame and guilt of thinking they're a bad person because they're a cheater or something. It's like, no, you actually have a neurodivergence that you need to lean in on understanding so you can express that creative energy in a healthy manner that will keep you from having a destructive force in your own life. So,
Mhm.
whatever the greater world is doing, you still have power in your personal realm through your own consciousness and deciding what you will tap into. But one of the most important things to do is to unplug yourself from that collective on a regular basis. The easiest way to do that, I know I'm a broken record about this at this point, but it's that important, is to do digital detoxes on a regular basis. Because you want to think about the digital and the electronic world, and our brain is run by electrical impulses, as being something that is plugging into you as much as you are plugging into it. Regularly unplugging from it is the thing that will give you greater personal clarity. When we talk about the need for positive self-talk, remember, you are your own life coach. If you talk to yourself like, that was awful, that was terrible, you better do better, you suck, then you're not going to like yourself very much and you're going to be afraid of the work that you're doing. If you talk to yourself about, like, okay, that was difficult and you did get anxious, but oh my God, you did so much better than you used to. Let's
Yeah.
celebrate this victory. Then you will be encouraged. You will be supported and you will be loved. But nothing in the positive self talk has to do with ignoring or denying the things that we all need to elevate ourselves above to get the best results from that darker energy. Because darkness is not evil, but darkness can feed evil. Now, do I believe in good and evil? I 100% do. It is wrong to intentionally inflict harm and pain on others. It just is, like, nobody's ever going to talk me out of that one. And that is something that I genuinely believe from the work that I do as well. That does not mean you need to share my view, but if you want to find your way out of your own personal darkness, the only way to do it is to be the guide within your head that encourages you rather than discourages you, because discouragement is the thing that makes us stop. Fear is one of the things that feeds the karmic cyclical pattern of history that causes us to become self-destructive and to create societal scapegoats, which is what we are engaging in right now, where we blame one set of people for the societal troubles rather than taking personal responsibility for the things that are going wrong. The path to enlightenment, the path to freedom, and the path to breaking our cycles lies in the ability to take an honest accounting of who we are, what we are doing, what we need to change. And the only way to do that is to understand, like I was talking about with the research I did into all of the trauma that I suffered. And it was like, I get it. It was at the lowest level that you could have it, but I had every single form of it, almost as if something was trying to get me to understand it so that I could engineer solutions for other people. Now, do I believe in a spiritual sense that I signed up for that in some energetic realm? 100% I believe that. It's one of the few things that just would make a lot of my life make sense, is that I was willing to experience a lot of things so that I could understand them. I come from a genetic line of teachers. On one side, I come from Scottish coal miners, and like they're, where they were very, very bright, but were they well educated? Typically, no, they had to leave school at like the ages of 12 and 13. On my father's side, it's Ivy League back generations. We're talking about like before this nation was a nation. I have an ancestor who was hanged as a witch in Salem, Massachusetts. She was Rebecca Nurse. She was 72 at the time they did that to her. She was largely deaf and couldn't even hear their questions. It really was the proverbial witch hunt. But that's how far back I go in this particular country. And in that country, we evolved into teachers. So my ability to understand something, you can't really teach about something that you don't have a tremendous understanding of. And when it comes to
Mhm.
trauma, to pain, and to things that hold us back, the only way to truly understand them is to take a personal accounting of the ways that they influence our lives, our friendships, our relationships, and the things that we do to defend our damage. Because I want you to think about favoring a limb that you have a strain in. You're limping along because you've twisted your ankle, you rolled your ankle. Now, instead of thinking about your physical body, think about your emotional body. You are frequently favoring and trying to protect injuries within through
Mhm.
denial, through the idea of projection of blame or scapegoating onto others, which again, stop thinking this is bad or good, but rather a human element that we all engage in. And
Mhm.
so the only key to the prison that is cyclical behavior, cyclical history, cyclical trauma is the willingness to look at it honestly. But if we look
Mm.
at it honestly in a condemning fashion and in a critical fashion, we will put up our walls of defensiveness because we're trying to fit. Don't hurt that injury any more than it's hurt. Come on, ow, ow, ow. If you're saying, this is not your fault, the things that you suffer from are not your fault. You were exposed to certain things that cause these injuries. You are not, this is not about personal value or personal blame. It is about being honest with yourself about what it is you struggle with. And when you
Mhm.
start being honest with yourself, remember to be kind about it. Every nurturing, when we, if you raise a child with love and kindness, they have confidence, they go forward with that confidence. If you beat the living crap out of a little kid and tell them, you're not the only one who might get a little emotional, that's actually what happened to me. I was beaten whenever
You get me, gay.
I was beaten whenever I was made a mistake. You have people who are afraid to try.
Yep.
Talk to yourself encouragingly. And the more awkward it feels, the more you need to do it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I guess you're hitting on it, but it's like, you are not responsible for what happened to you, like, but like you are responsible for what you do with what's left, right? And so it's not about like putting a negativity or like I don't know, like being hard on yourself, but it's like, okay, hey, this happened, but I can't use that as a crutch forever. Like I've got to do some work now. And I think that was the biggest hurdle for me to jump over was I think I spent a lot of time where I was just like, I was, this happened to me and that's why this is why I am. And I just like, oh yeah, and that's just how it is. Ta-da. I'm sorry you get this broken version of me. But now that I'm like, working on things, I'm like, oh, well, damn, I could have just been working on things this whole time and, maybe be a little bit, more progressed. But again, I'm not like beating myself down for the time lost, quote unquote, or whatever. But yeah, you have to take the responsibility that you have to take is for what you do now with that information. And it's not easy. It sucks. And I'm getting a lot of pushback, in my life. And I don't know, it's not easy. But when we talk about creation, like new beginnings and stuff, I think that what we're all, most of us, myself in particular, the change and the rebirth happens only after the tower occurs, right? We don't want to feel the destruction and our world's just like utterly falling apart around us before we can be reborn into something new. Like the phoenix has to literally become a pile of ash before it is able to come back, right? And that's a hard pill to swallow.
Um,
My story, and it's like that's where I'm at now. And but go ahead, yeah, what you got?
No, no, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jacob. Because
Oh.
you're on a really good train of thought. The only thing I wanted to draw a little bit of attention to, shine the flashlight on, is the idea of we all go through a victim stage. And it is not about having a victim mentality. It is
Hmm.
about recognition. Until such time as you are willing to actually take that personal accounting and you have to deal with the, man, that was wrong of it all. Why would you
Hmm.
do that to a little kid? Or why would you do that to another person? Or you have to go through that because it's a natural human emotional response. And all you have to do is have the awareness of, well, this won't get me anywhere. It won't
Yeah.
get it, the why stage, the victim stage that is again, we shame that a lot, but some horrific things have happened to people, and it's okay that they feel the sting and the pain and the confusion that comes with why would that happen to me? And as I'm always saying, realistically, why anybody, it is part of the human experience, but that does not lessen the pain of having been the recipient of that damaging behavior.
Hmm.
It's a stage and people can get stuck in it, and frequently they develop something called borderline personality disorder when they do. But there is an awareness that comes through sometimes therapy, sometimes spiritual access, sometimes simply self-education, where you understand, okay, no amount of like accounting and saying that this was wrong and this was terrible will change the damage. But if I step outside the this was wrong and this was not fair of it all and say, well, now I have a greater understanding of the hurdles and the obstacles that I am facing. And if I do so without taking it as personally as we do, because in spirituality, we really are urged to like try not to take what happened to you so personally. And there's always that pushback stage in people where it's like, do you know how much it hurt? Yeah, a lot of us actually really do know how much it hurt, and it's never to diminish your pain, but to tell you that the path out of your pain is to let that part go because you can't change it. Nobody's getting a time machine, but you can take the information from the past to carry you forth on a path towards healing, towards greater understanding, towards greater emotional health and greater emotional satisfaction, regardless of what the greater world is doing. But I want to go back to the idea of the collective consciousness and the collective unconsciousness for what's going on in the greater world and how you can help protect yourself from some of the darker impulses and influences and cycles that we are pretty clearly repeating.
Hmm.
One is try not to let it alter your behavior towards others, even if you don't agree with them, even if they're doing something hateful, because you don't want to let that energy into you. It has
Hmm.
nothing to do with acceptance or like it really is nothing to do with that. It has to do with if you ingest something, which if you eat a whole bunch of sugar, you're not going to be too surprised if you're all hyped up and then you have a sugar crash and you have a headache the next day because it's not super good for you. It's an inflammatory agent. Other people's energy is also an inflammatory agent. You want
Hmm.
to take the inflammation down on any form of injury in order to heal it. Long ago, I had a terrible car accident. I ended up in a wheelchair for 4 months. There's my little trauma chuckle that I do because was that fun? No, it was not fun. I was healing opposite side breaks. Being in a wheelchair for 4 months was absolutely horrifying. I couldn't even shower by myself. But what it did on the other side of that was it made me incredibly resilient. I had to work on that injury for many years in order to regain my balance because my heel had been pulverized in a car accident and I broke the majority of my left hand. So my right heel, my left hand. And one of the things that taught me about is the ability to let go of the pain that has happened in order to achieve healing. So, in the cyclical energy that we're talking about, if you reach what you reach for is what you're ingesting. If you want to get angry about what other people are doing, if you want to just do a deep dive on the fearful influences in our lives, that's what you're ingesting and that's what you will feel. That's what you're inflaming within yourself. Try to have a neutral mindset and to only engage when it is necessary for your personal safety. Or I do believe in the right and the need for intervention. That's where I differentiate from Taoists and Buddhists sometimes, is I do believe that we have an obligation to try and walk forward with greater respect for ourselves and others, which does include intervention and doing the best that we can do in this world. And that's the other thing that you can do to try and break a cycle of history that we are very clearly repeating is to what you put out there, then other people are ingesting. So your best bet in changing what is happening is to, it goes back to some of the spiritual saying, be the change.
Hmm. Hmm.
A lot of
Yep.
things that get turned into these cliches still have a basis in fact. So when they become a cliched thing, you start breaking it down. What do we mean by be the change? What whoever you wish to see the world emulating, you have to be that person first. Because if you're waiting for somebody else to do it, you're going to be waiting a long time. You have no control over them, but you have all the control in the world over you after you heal yourself. If you don't have a lot of control over yourself, it means you're still injured and keep working on it. And have patience with the journey. If something took a long time to put into place in your foundational and your formative structure, it might take a while to dismantle and to put back together in a more functional space. We talked about the tower as being about rebirth or destruction. It is also the divine intervention card. It is also the epiphanies card. And it is also the biases behind it is anything built on a faulty foundation must fall. If you were built on a faulty foundation, it does not mean that you need to fall, but it does mean that you need to change. It does mean that you need to embrace the idea of rebirth, of examination, and saying, where are the cracks in my foundation and how can I fill them in and rebuild my structure into something that will withstand any winds of change? Because the world is changing around us and it's a perilous time. But that does not mean that your life has to be ruined or that you have to live in misery or sadness or fear. Gather with people who are like minded and walk forward with as much honor and integrity as you can. And you are being the change. You are carrying that forward. One of the things that you can do is, we're heading up towards the holiday season. I'm such a broken record about this as well, but please consider giving to food banks if you do not have enough, or if you have enough. Many do not. Many do not. And if we judge other people, then we are actually ultimately judging ourselves in the collective consciousness because we do have an obligation to one another. Try to be kind, try to be compassionate, and understand that most people are coming from a place of what they were encouraged to believe, and that we can all become blind to the damage that we are doing. Because that denial thing exists as well. When we are acting from a place of anger or fear, denial, they're besties. They're besties because you're trying to protect that damage or protect that rolled ankle in your psyche. So, Jacob, dude, what are you thinking about the greater world? What are your suggestions?
Um, I mean, basically, what you kind of took everything that I would have mentioned there. I mean, especially if we want to think about this, I hear a lot of talk. Maybe it's just because of the insular bubble that I've built around myself, but about you're kind of the author of your own reality and like your perception of reality. You can change it, and like the world molds around your perception and all these different things. And if we want to go with that thought, which I kind of do, then the things that you do affect the people around you. I mean, we talk about, like, oh, I'm such an empath, this, that, and the other, and which is fun, and I poke fun at it a little bit. But that's just because, like, even if you wouldn't describe yourself that way, you may not know it, but you are affected by the energies of people around you all the time, and they are affected by yours as well.
Mhm.
And just like, I mean, like when I was a restaurant manager and someone was pissed off about something, 9 times out of 10, all I had to do was sit there and calmly let them rant, and then they talked themselves out. And then there was like an emotional exchange, like I picked up some of that negativity, but they also took away some of that, calm as well. And, if we want to stretch that out, I have spent a lot more time like doing activism work, and like I need to go pick up donations today for like the homeless, the unhoused group that I work with. And I feel like I can no longer just be someone who says things. Now it's time to do things and affect that positive change, because when people see you doing things, they could pick up on that energy, whether they realize it or not, and it spurs them to do things as well. So I really like you bringing that up, because it's the way that you move through the world is going to affect those around you on an energetic level, whether you or they realize it or not. And so, being mindful, and that's one of the things that Jung talks about a lot, is being mindful and understanding what you're feeling and why you're feeling.
Mhm.
Um, because it leads to not only a greater understanding of yourself, but the influence that it can have on those around you because of this, great unconscious or subconscious, or however you want to think of it. Your influence is great in that respect. And it may not be something that is tangible, it may not be something that will give you, instant results, or them instant results, but you're planting the seeds, as it were. And you just need to move through life mindfully and make the conscious decision. And it is a conscious decision. You're not just going to wake up one day and be like, I am altruistic and love everybody and blah, blah, blah. I still want to get into fights with people on social media about the dumbest things, but I
Yeah,
have
that's wasting energy. Yeah.
yeah, have learned to resist the temptation, because I am no longer in a place where I will engage with bad actors.
Mhm.
If you are coming to me in a place where you are receptive, I am always receptive to what you have to say. I know before you say it that I am going to think that it is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but I'm willing to listen to it and give you a fair shot. But I oftentimes find that I'm not going to receive that same, respect from someone else, and I refuse to engage with somebody who is going to their sole purpose is to um, cause agitation. And like, because what do we, neither of us benefit? There's
Yeah,
not
it's
an exchange of
about
ideas,
expanding their
and the
power.
only in right, exactly, and the only energetic exchange is negative, and I don't have time for that in my life anymore. And I'm just trying to be mindful of what I think and why I will feel more than anything. I'm pretty solid on my thoughts, but I'm being more mindful of my feelings and the things that affect my change. I mean, something I should be doing as a bipolar patient regardless, but I'm just a lot more aware of those things, and I'm refusing to engage in things that are going to result in a net loss of positive feeling or energy, because I don't have enough of that to go around as it is. So I refuse to exchange that with others who are meeting me in a not great headspace.
So I want to like call attention to a couple of things, and one of them is that discourse where people are just arguing and yelling back and forth. That is people trying to experience their power through intimidation and control of another, so that they can feel like they're more in control of their own lives. It doesn't even mean they're horrible human beings. It's just that they're taking the wrong path towards feeling like they have some control over their life.
Hmm.
And to when we talk about walking forward with kindness and compassion and being the change that you want to be, remember that if we're going to talk about archetypes, which is one of Jung's things, you can approach your life as your hero's journey, and
Hmm.
that your ability to be a leader does exist, whether or not you feel powerful around other people. Taking command of your own energy is one of the things that will make you stand out as a leader to other people. And the fact that we keep following these very negative forces in leadership does not mean that the softer or the more compassionate ones are weaker, just that the harsher ones appear more for the fearful mindset that other people have. And so that we lack sound leadership because unfortunately, people who are compassionate sometimes do not know how to deal with people who are pushing back really hard. Because of
Hmm.
the bullying tendency that people have from a fearful place, it does not even mean they're horrible human beings. Again, they're trying to experience their power. They're trying to control another because they want to feel like they have power in their own life because basically they're scared and won't admit it.
Right.
If you see somebody trying to start or instigate an argument with you as coming from a place of fear, and have compassion for the idea that we're all fearful sometimes and that we are mostly manifesting and talking about the things that we learned. One of the reasons I can take that mindset is that I've shared before. My father was a college professor in, again, an anthracite area in northeastern Pennsylvania, which had historically been lower middle class, working poor. But like not compared to real poverty. These people had functional lives. And that many of the things that were taught there, I did not realize were deeply racist until I was much older. And I mean much older, like 20, 21. I got out of that area. When my father died, I went to an Ivy League town where my mother worked for that university. And so there was this dichotomy in my experience that took me from one mindset to a completely different one. And so I really did get that contrasting thing that made me question almost everything. And I'm so glad because it changed so many things that I actually really value now. But when I see people manifesting the attitudes that have not been changed, I am less likely to think that's about you being a bad person and more about what they were taught that they haven't questioned. And if you want
Hmm.
somebody to question what they're thinking and they're doing, the only way to do it is please go back to the concept of compassionate and positive self-talk is the only way to encourage yourself forward. Compassionate and positive exterior talk towards others is the only way for people to drop their guards when they are fearful. And it does not mean signing off on the idea of someone being a racist or a homophobe or any of the other things, but that understanding if they are portraying that particular characteristic, that there is a chance that they can change it. It's simply that they have not questioned it. But if you are reacting to somebody with fury and judgment of around like, hey, you're a bad person if you believe that, there are people who are acting from a different energy and have learned different things. Only positive people make good teachers. So if you can't relate to yourself as a leader, relate to yourself as somebody who has the ability to get somebody else to drop their guard and listen if you approach them compassionately. But you have to recognize whether or not someone can ever be in a listening space. And if they're not, that's where going from a neutral standpoint and going forward, knowing that you truly can only change yourself. And if you change yourself, then your authentic self will be what people perceive, and people react best to a purified form of energy. And so that is the thing that you can do to help break the cycles in the greater world. I'm sorry that we didn't societally try to break that particular challenge, but by the same token, I've been studying history My whole life, my father was a historian. So again, I have a genetic predisposition towards loving history and can retain a lot of things. I know that this pattern has repeated over and over and over again, and I can tell you that we actually do get better. We actually do get better, even though it's incremental, even though it's like, really, what scale are you judging from? From the scale, the standpoint of, are we evolving at all? We are, but we just keep backsliding in the exact same ways. And so the best way to do that is to sidestep the conflict that keeps going over and over again. Be in charge of your own energy, be in charge of the way that you present yourself to the world. Never stand by for the cruelty and mistreatment of another if you can possibly help it. I am really not saying get in front of, flying bullets, but to remember that we have more power to change and to be the catalyst, the tower moment that we all have within us when we are whole and we have that energy of, I have control of my personal power because it is no longer hampered by the shadow side injuries that we all incur. And no matter how you've handled them in the past, even if you're like, hey, I've done that victim mentality thing. Hey, so did I. You should see me in my 20s. I was the angriest person you've ever met. I was so freaking pissed, but I'm not any longer because I didn't want to feel like that any longer. It felt wretched. And for a while, I worked with repression and found out that just made it worse. And then I worked with understanding. And as I began to understand, I could see that my parents, who had inflicted all this damage so intentionally, were actually results of the same things that had happened to them. That it was an inevitable cycle carrying forward. And guess who broke it? I did. And you can break your patterns as well. You can break the cycles. And when you break the cycles, no matter what the greater world is doing in a spiritual sense, you are freed. And you will evolve past that in whatever comes next. It is a challenging journey and it is one that is filled with lessons, but that's what our cycles are about as well. Karmic cycles in the greater world, karmic cycles in our personal world. And then it all does tie back to, we want to separate spirituality and science as if they have never met. They are best as, first cousins, where one informs the other.
Yeah.
Don't, again, that is, don't isolate yourself. Have more information and you will have more expansion. I guess that's the easiest way of putting it. Jacob, any
Yeah.
wrap up on this for you?
Nope, not necessarily. Just if you're engaging with your shadow self, recognize the positives along with the negatives. Be sure to give enough credence to those aspects as well. And if you are interested in more Jungian psychology, I guess a good place to start that I found for a lot of people would be Jung's Map of the Soul. That's a fantastic book. If you don't want to read his original writings, which can be, I like them, but I also do this for a living, quote unquote. So whatever. But start there, and of course, I'm available to talk about this at nauseum. So
And
there we
you're
go.
at the reflectivepathtarot.com. And I'm
Yes, ma'am.
at therisingmoon.com exclusively. Neither of us will ever cold call you or approach you in DMs. Or why do we have to say that over and over again? Because every social media
Yeah.
platform has scammers who are impersonating anybody who has any access to a following. So you have to come to us, we don't come to you. And it's
Yep.
kind of that simple. And to please, please, please remember that we are not helpless in anything, even if you're super deeply damaged. Because the other thing I want you to know about that horrific car accident that I had that landed me in a wheelchair for 4 months is that they told me it was a catastrophic injury and I would never fully recuperate from it. They were effing wrong because I did not give up on it and I have now fully regained all forms of balance, all forms of mobility. I have one thing where I don't have a flexible ankle, but I learned to compensate for it so well that there are times when I no longer even remember that I have it. And so don't give up on whatever it is that you're trying to recover from. It can take time, but you can make slow and steady progress on anything that you're working on. And that is all that is asked of us in a spiritual sense, is to keep trying to find your higher self. And if you find your higher self, then you find the collective consciousness that then informs your path to the best possible outcomes that you can have. You'll be tapped into your intuition. You will be tapped into your best timeline, which is another concept that we should talk about one of these days. But Jacob, thank you so much for joining me. Thank everybody else for joining me. If you need me, you know where to find me. Everybody have a really good season. This is a time of rest and recuperation. Honor your need for energetic rebuilding. Don't push yourself too far. And if you're suffering from, I just did a podcast on burnout. Please take good care of yourself and know that you aren't in this alone. And if you're confused and if you're angry and if you're afraid, know that there are many people who are trying their very best to be the change in this world. Simply join us and we will have our own collective. Take care. Be well. Thank you for joining us.